October 24, 1942, 11 p.m. A ridge near Henderson Field, Guadalcanal. Gunnery Sergeant John Basilone stood in the darkness, listening. The jungle around him was silent, but it was the wrong kind of silence. The insects had stopped chirping. The birds had gone quiet. Something was moving out there in the black. Basilone commanded 2 sections of heavy machine guns, 4 guns total, 16 men under his command. They had been on this ridge for weeks, defending the most important piece of ground in the Pacific. Henderson Field, the airstrip behind them, was the only place American planes could land for 1,000 miles. If the Japanese took it, they took Guadalcanal. If they took Guadalcanal, they could cut Australia off from the United States. Everything depended on this airstrip. And everything depended on the Marines who defended it. Basilone checked his guns one more time. The .30 caliber Brownings were positioned to create overlapping fields of fire across the ridge. His crews were ready, but none of them knew that in the darkness, 3,000 Japanese soldiers were moving toward their position. None of them knew that by dawn, most of them would be dead. And none of them knew that Basilone was about to fight a battle so desperate, so impossible, that people would barely believe it happened. This is a story about one Marine who refused to retreat when every rational person would have run. If you want more deep dives into the soldiers and decisions that shaped World War II, subscribe to the channel. These stories deserve to be told. What happened on that ridge over the next 8 hours would determine whether America kept its only foothold in the Solomon Islands or lost everything. The Japanese had been planning this assault for weeks. They had massed their forces for one overwhelming night attack. They believed the Marines were exhausted, undersupplied, and ready to break. They were right about the first 2, but they were catastrophically wrong about the third. John Basilone was not a typical Marine. He had grown up in Raritan, New Jersey, the 6th of 10 children in an Italian immigrant family. Before the war, he had served 3 years in the army in the Philippines, then came home and worked as a truck driver. He could have stayed there. He had already done his service. But when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, Basilone walked into a Marine recruiting office and enlisted. He was 25 years old. The recruiter asked him why he was joining the Marines when he had already been in the army. Basilone's answer was simple. The Marines were going to fight, and he wanted to be where the fighting was. His commanders quickly recognized that Basilone was different. He was calm under pressure in ways that couldn't be taught. Other Marines panicked during training exercises. Basilone stayed cool. He had a natural understanding of how machine guns worked, not just mechanically but tactically. He knew where to position them, how to create interlocking fields of fire, how to maximize their effectiveness. By the time his unit shipped out to the Pacific, Basilone was a sergeant. By the time they landed on Guadalcanal, he was commanding machine gun sections. Guadalcanal in October 1942 was hell. The island was covered in jungle so thick you couldn't see 10 feet in front of you. The heat was unbearable. Malaria and dysentery were killing almost as many Marines as Japanese bullets. Supplies were scarce because Japanese ships controlled the waters around the island at night. The Marines called it Starvation Island. They were down to 2 meals a day, and those meals were usually just rice and captured Japanese rations. The only thing keeping them alive was Henderson Field. As long as American planes could fly from that airstrip, they could defend the island. But the Japanese knew this too. On October 23rd, Japanese commanders finalized their plan. Lieutenant General Harakichi Hyakutake had assembled the largest force Japan had committed to any battle in the Pacific so far. 3,000 soldiers from the 2nd Division would attack from the south, directly at Henderson Field. They would advance at night when American planes couldn't fly. They would overwhelm the Marine positions through sheer numbers. Japanese soldiers had been told that the Americans were weak, that one determined assault would break them. The attack was scheduled for the night of October 24th. The Marines knew something was coming. Patrols had reported Japanese movement in the jungle. Artillery spotters had seen enemy troops massing. But they didn't know where or when the attack would come. The perimeter around Henderson Field was 7 miles long. The Marines had to defend all of it with fewer than 5,000 men. They were stretched thin everywhere. Colonel Merritt Edson, who commanded the defensive positions, had to make impossible decisions about where to concentrate his forces. He put some of his best units, including Basilon's machine gun sections, on a ridge south of the airfield. It was high ground with good fields of fire. If the Japanese came from the south, this ridge would be critical. Basilon's position was simple but deadly. He had 4 heavy machine guns arranged in a line along the ridge. Each gun could fire 450 rounds per minute. Each gun had a crew of 4 men, a gunner, an assistant gunner, and 2 ammunition carriers. The guns were positioned so their fire overlapped. Any Japanese soldiers trying to cross the open ground in front of the ridge would walk into a wall of bullets. At least that was the theory. The reality was about to be much more complicated. The attack began just after midnight. Japanese artillery opened up first, shells screaming over the ridge and exploding near Henderson Field. Then came the infantry. Thousands of Japanese soldiers emerged from the jungle, moving in waves toward the Marine positions. They came straight at Basilon's ridge. Within minutes, the battle turned into chaos. The darkness was total. Marines couldn't see the enemy until they were almost on top of the positions. The only light came from muzzle flashes and exploding grenades. The noise was overwhelming. Machine guns firing, men screaming, officers shouting orders that nobody could hear. Basilon's guns opened up the moment the Japanese came into range. The Brownings hammered away, tracers cutting through the darkness. Japanese soldiers fell in rows. But they kept coming. More waves behind the first. Then more behind those. Basilone moved between his gun positions, checking on his crews, making sure they had ammunition, adjusting their fire. The Japanese were attacking in numbers the Marines hadn't seen before. This wasn't a probe or a raid. This was an all-out assault meant to break through. Then the first gun jammed. Basilone ran to it. The barrel had overheated from continuous firing. He grabbed the barrel to swap it out. The metal was so hot it burned his hands immediately, searing his skin. He ignored the pain and changed the barrel anyway, getting the gun back in action. Seconds later, another gun jammed. Then another. The Brownings were excellent weapons, but they weren't designed for this kind of sustained fire. Basilone ran from gun to gun, fixing jams, changing barrels, burning his hands worse each time. The Japanese reached the gun positions. Close combat erupted all along the ridge. Marines fought with rifles, pistols, knives, anything they had. Basilone saw his gun crews being hit. One gunner went down. Then another. The assistant gunners took over. Then they went down too. Within 30 minutes of the attack starting, Basilone had lost more than half his men. The wounded were pulled back. The dead stayed where they fell. The survivors kept firing. Basilone made a decision that probably saved the position. Instead of staying with one gun, he started running between all of them, manning whichever gun needed him most. When one gun ran out of ammunition, he switched to another. When that one jammed, he moved to a third. He became a one-man crew for 4 machine guns, shifting positions constantly, never stopping. The Japanese couldn't tell how many guns were actually still operational. They kept running into murderous fire from different angles. But ammunition was becoming critical. Each machine gun burned through belts of rounds at an incredible rate. The ammunition carriers who were supposed to bring up more belts were dead or wounded. Basilone realized he was about to run completely dry. If that happened, the Japanese would overrun the position. He grabbed as many ammunition belts as he could carry, nearly 70 pounds worth, and ran back through enemy fire to a supply point 200 yards behind the ridge. Japanese soldiers shot at him in the darkness. Bullets kicked up dirt around his feet. He made it to the supply point, loaded up with more ammunition, and ran back. He made this run multiple times over the next few hours, each time expecting to be hit, each time somehow making it through. Around 3 a.m., the Japanese changed tactics. Instead of frontal assaults, they tried to infiltrate around the sides of Bassilone's position. Small groups of soldiers crawled through the jungle, trying to get behind the Marine lines. Bassilone heard them moving in the darkness. He grabbed a rifle and hunted them. When he ran out of rifle ammunition, he picked up a pistol from a dead Marine. When the pistol ran dry, he fought hand to hand. A Japanese soldier came at him with a bayonet. Bassilone killed him with a machete. Another attacked from the side. Bassilone shot him at point-blank range with a captured Japanese rifle. The battle had become surreal. Bassilone later couldn't remember all the details. He remembered running, firing, changing gun barrels, hauling ammunition, fighting off attackers who got too close. He remembered the smell of gunpowder and blood. He remembered the heat of the machine gun barrels burning through whatever he wrapped around his hands. He remembered Japanese soldiers screaming as they charged, and the screams cutting off when the machine guns found them. But the sequence of events blurred together into one continuous nightmare of combat. At one point, all 4 of his original machine guns were either jammed or out of ammunition simultaneously. Bassilone was alone on the ridge with enemy soldiers all around him. He could have pulled back to the secondary defensive line. Every tactical manual would have said to retreat. But Bassilone looked at the ground behind him, the gentle slope down to Henderson Field, and he knew that if he gave up this ridge, the Japanese would have the high ground. They would be able to pour fire down onto the airfield. He had been ordered to hold this position, so he stayed. He scavenged ammunition from dead Marines and dead Japanese soldiers. He found a working machine gun from a destroyed position 50 yards away and dragged it back to his line. He set it up and started firing again. Japanese soldiers who thought they had overrun the position suddenly faced machine gun fire from a gun that shouldn't have been there. The attack on that sector stalled. By 4 a.m., the Japanese assault was losing momentum. Their casualties had been catastrophic. Bodies were piled in front of the Marine positions. The soldiers who were still alive had been attacking for 4 hours straight through heavy fire. They were exhausted. Their officers had been killed. Radio communications had broken down. Units had gotten separated in the darkness and confusion. The attack that was supposed to break through and capture Henderson Field had turned into a slaughter. At dawn, the Japanese pulled back. Bassilone stood on the ridge surrounded by dead. His hands were burned and bloody. His uniform was torn and covered in dirt and blood, some his, most not. His machine guns were silent. The barrels were warped from heat. Ammunition boxes were empty. And in front of his position, the bodies of Japanese soldiers stretched as far as he could see in the early morning light. Marines who came up to the ridge later that morning counted the dead in front of Bassilone's guns. 38 Japanese soldiers had been killed directly in front of his position. Given that wounded soldiers had likely been pulled back during the night, and that some of the dead had been killed by other Marines before Bassilone's section was isolated, the actual number of enemy soldiers Bassilone personally killed or incapacitated was probably higher. But 38 was the official count. 38 enemy soldiers killed by one Marine with a few machine guns over the course of one night. When officers asked Bassilone what happened, he gave short, factual answers. The Japanese attacked. His men fought. Some died. He kept the guns running. That was all. He didn't think he had done anything special. Every Marine on Guadalcanal was fighting just as hard. He had just been in a position where the fighting was particularly intense. But the officers saw it differently. Bassilone had held a critical position against overwhelming odds. If that ridge had fallen, the entire defensive line might have collapsed. The Japanese would have broken through to Henderson Field. The airstrip would have been lost. And if the airstrip was lost, Guadalcanal was lost. One Marine's refusal to retreat had prevented a strategic disaster. The battle for Henderson Field continued for another 2 days. The Japanese launched more attacks. None succeeded. By October 26th, their offensive had completely failed. They had lost nearly 2,000 men. The survivors retreated into the jungle. The Americans held Henderson Field. The turning point of the Pacific War had been reached, though nobody knew it yet. 5 months later, in May 1943, Lieutenant General Alexander Vandegrift, commander of the 1st Marine Division, presented John Basilone with the Medal of Honor. The citation read that Basilone had contributed materially to the defeat and virtually annihilated a Japanese regiment. Basilone was the first enlisted Marine to receive the Medal of Honor in World War II. The medal came with a promotion to gunnery sergeant and orders to return to the United States. The Marine Corps had plans for Basilone. They wanted to use him to sell war bonds. They sent him on a tour across the country. Crowds gathered to see the hero of Guadalcanal. Basilone gave speeches, shook hands, and posed for photographs. He hated every minute of it. He was a machine gunner, not a celebrity. While he was touring America, his friends were fighting and dying in the Pacific. It felt wrong. After more than a year of war bond tours and public appearances, Basilone requested to return to combat. The Marine Corps refused. He was too valuable as a symbol, they said. He could do more good inspiring Americans at home than fighting in the Pacific. Basilone kept requesting. The Marine Corps kept refusing. Finally, Basilone made it clear that if they didn't send him back to combat, he would make himself a problem. The Marine Corps relented. In February 1945, Basilone landed on Iwo Jima with the 5th Marine Division. He was a gunnery sergeant commanding a machine gun platoon. On the first day of the invasion, February 19th, his unit was pinned down on the beach by intense Japanese fire. Basilone led his men off the beach and through a minefield. He single-handedly destroyed a Japanese blockhouse that was holding up the advance. He was guiding a tank through the battlefield when a Japanese mortar round exploded nearby. Shrapnel tore through his body. John Basilone died on Iwo Jima for hours after landing on the island. He was 28 years old. The Marine Corps awarded him the Navy Cross posthumously for his actions on Iwo Jima. He remains the only enlisted Marine in World War II to receive both the Medal of Honor and the Navy Cross. But most people remember him for Guadalcanal, for that night on the ridge when he fought alone against impossible odds. So when you hear about Basilone killing 38 Japanese soldiers in one night, it's easy to picture some kind of action movie scenario. One man with unlimited ammunition mowing down waves of enemies. But that's not what happened. What happened was far more desperate and far more human. Basilone didn't have unlimited ammunition. He had to run through enemy fire multiple times to get more. His guns didn't work perfectly. They jammed constantly and he burned his hands fixing them. He wasn't surrounded by Hollywood explosions. He was surrounded by darkness and confusion and dying men. And he didn't fight because he was fearless. He fought because his orders were to hold that ridge, and he was a Marine, and Marines don't abandon their positions. That's what the Medal of Honor really represents. Not superhuman abilities or impossible heroics, but ordinary men doing their duty in extraordinary circumstances. Basilone was a truck driver from New Jersey who knew how to operate a machine gun. When the moment came, he did his job. He did it when his crew was killed. He did it when his ammunition ran out. He did it when his guns jammed. He did it when every rational calculation said to retreat. He did his job, and because he did, Henderson Field stayed in American hands. The Pacific War was full of desperate battles and terrible casualties. Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. Each one was a nightmare. But Guadalcanal was where the United States stopped retreating and started advancing. And on one critical night during that battle, on one ridge near one airfield, a Marine gunnery sergeant decided that the Japanese weren't getting past his position. That decision, multiplied by thousands of similar decisions made by thousands of other Marines and soldiers and sailors across the Pacific, won the war. After the war, the Marine Corps named a base after Basilone, Camp Basilone in California. His hometown built a memorial. His name appears in history books and museums. But the best memorial might be something simpler. Every Marine who goes through training today learns about Basilone. They learn that when it matters most, when everything is falling apart and the odds are impossible, You don't quit. You do your job. That was Bassilone's legacy. Not the medals or the monuments, but the example. One Marine, one knight, refusing to give up. Thanks for watching this deep dive into one of the Pacific War's most incredible true stories. If you want more stories about the soldiers and decisions that shaped World War II, subscribe to the channel. These stories deserve to be told.